Hello students, how are you? This is economics lesson video for grade 11, presented by me, Mr. Fitsumir Mias. It is for term 1, week 5 in lesson 1. In today's lesson, we are going to deal with the effects of change in demand and supply on equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Students, do you remember what I have discussed in the previous session? In the previous lesson, we have dealt with the concept of market equilibrium. Market equilibrium refers to a situation which the quantity demand of a commodity equals the quantity supply of a commodity. In market equilibrium, there is equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. It is a condition or a situation that demand and supply becomes equal. At this point, we will have equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. Whenever there is a price above equilibrium, it will create excess supply. And when there is price lower than that of equilibrium price, it will create excess demand. A price below the equilibrium price will encourage consumers to purchase more commodity. That will increase demand. But a price below the equilibrium price will discourage producers not to produce and supply more commodities into the market. This will create excess demand. During this time, there will be a price push pressure in the market. The product's price will gradually increase. But when the price above the equilibrium, it will create excess supply. Producers will be encouraged to supply and produce more commodity, but consumers will be discouraged to purchase products with a price above equilibrium price. And this time, there will be pressure in the decrease of the commodities price in the market. This is the situation or illustration that we have discussed through equilibrium schedule and equilibrium graph. We can also calculate mathematically the market equilibrium. Through a mathematical solution, we have seen that we can find the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity according to the given information of the market demand function and market supply function. Then we have also briefly discussed about the demand and supply curve do not intersect each other. This is a condition where there are prospective consumers and producers of a commodity. It happens when the price at which producers are ready to produce is so high that the consumers are not willing to buy even a single unit of a commodity. The demand curve and the supply curve will not intersect each other. This is how we're going to have never intersect supply and demand curves. But economically, it's been expressed as not economically viable condition because consumers will not purchase the product. Producers intend to produce the product with very high price, which consumers cannot afford. How demand and supply curve intersect in such condition? It will not. So it will create never intersect demand and supply curve, and that is referred as not economically viable. So this is what we have seen in the previous session. Effects of change in demand or shift in the demand curve when supply remain constant. Student, I hope you remember very well that when you say change in demand and change in quantity demand, change in demand is simply referred as a shift in the demand curve. There is an entire movement in the demand curve. But whenever we say change in quantity demand, that's going to be a movement along the given demand curve. Now, let us see the impacts or the situations in relation to the shift in the demand curve. There can be two situations of change in demand. Effects of increase in demand. Whenever there is an increase in demand, what will be the impact or the effect on equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity? Under the condition of stable supply curve, which means there is no change in the supply curve, if there is increase in demand, That means a rightward shift in the demand curve. Whenever the curve shifts to the right, it represents increase in demand, and when it shifts to the left, it represents decrease in demand. So increase in demand, rightward shift in the demand curve will result both equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity increases. Here is the graphic illustration of effects of increase in demand. You can clearly see on the graph when supply remain constant, that is the positively sloped curve, supply curve, it will not shift or move to any direction, but there will be a movement on the demand curve, the downward slope curve, and that moves to the right, which represents increase in demand. Whenever there is a new equilibrium point, E1, that represents increase in quantity demand and increase in the equilibrium price. We can analyze this into the real-life situation. Whenever there is a constant supply in the market, but demand increases among households, it will lead to increase in price because there is excess demand in the market, but the supply does not meet the growing demand. This will create an increase in the market price. This is what this graph illustrates. Whenever there is increase in demand without change in supply, that will lead to an increase in the equilibrium price. This is the effect that we have in the equilibrium market. The second situation is in relation to effects of decrease in demand. When there is a decrease in demand, what will be the effect on equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity? Under the condition of stable supply curve, again, if there is a decrease in demand, which means a leftward shift of the demand curve, both equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price decreases. Let us see that with the graphic illustration. Here is the graphic illustration of effects in decrease in demand. You can clearly see on the graph, supply curve remain constant, it will not move to any direction, and there will be a movement on the demand curve to the left. That represents decrease in demand. Whenever it decreases, it results a new equilibrium point on E1 again, and that clearly showed that there is a decrease in price and a decrease in quantity demand. Again, we can also analyze this situation to the real-life situation. When there is a decrease in demand, supply remain constant, it will result a decrease in the price of the commodity. For such product, for such commodities, when there is low demand, producers or sellers will be forced to sell their commodity with low price because demand for the product is going to be decreases. In order to sell the commodity, producers or sellers will not sell their product with the previous equilibrium price. That's going to be very high for consumers. Since there is also a decrease in demand, there should be lower price for the product in order to sell it. This is the result that we have in a real life situation. So this is also explained or illustrated with this graph. For the previous both situation, here is a brief summary. With the same supply curve or having no change in the supply curve because of the increase in demand or decrease in demand, these are the effects. The effects of increase in demand is higher equilibrium price and larger equilibrium quantity. Whenever there is increase in demand in the market, it's obvious it leads producers to increase the price of their commodities while increasing their supply or their quantity. The other one is the effect of decrease in demand. It results lower equilibrium price and smaller equilibrium quantity. Whenever there is low demand for commodities, for products in the market, it's obvious in order to sell the product, there should be low price available for consumers. With low price, producers will sell their product if there is low demand for the product, particularly. So these are the effects in brief summary. The other situation is when there is a change in supply, when demand remain constant. The first situation is effects of increase in supply. Under the condition of stable demand curve, without having any change in the demand curve, if there is increase in the supply, that is a rightward shift of the supply curve, which is similar to that of the demand curve. Whenever there is increase, both supply and demand curve will shift towards to the right. Rightward movement represents increase in the supply or demand curve. So whenever there is increase in supply, that is a rightward shift in the supply curve, equilibrium price will decrease and equilibrium quantity increases. Let us see the graph in order to analyze with the real life situation. Here is the graphic illustration of effects of increase in supply. Now, demand curve will remain constant. The demand curve, which is the downward slope curve, that will not have any movement or shift. Simply, the positively sloped curve, which is the supply curve, will shift to the right. When it moves to the right, we're going to have a new equilibrium point, that is E1, and that represents lower price and higher quantity in the market. You can simply interpret that into the real-life market situation. Without a change in the demand for the product, when suppliers or producers supply and produce the product in larger quantity and make that available into the market, it will result a lower price for the product because there is excess supply in the market than that of demand. The products which is available in the market are higher than that of which is actually demanded, and this will result to have low price for the commodity because the products are now abundantly available in the market. This is the situation that we have in relation to this concept. But quantity, equilibrium quantity, increases since there is increase in supply. The second situation in relation to change in supply is effects of decrease in supply. Under the condition of stable demand curve, if there is a decrease in supply, that is a leftward shift of the supply curve, equilibrium price increases and equilibrium quantity decreases. Again, let us see this with the graph illustration. Effects of decrease in supply. When there is a decrease in supply, the supply curve, which is the positively sloped curve, will shift towards to the left. Demand curve, the downward slope demand curve, will remain constant. And then the new equilibrium point, E1, shows us clearly there is an increase in equilibrium price and a decrease in equilibrium quantity. Let us interpret that into the real-life market situation. Assume that there is a demand in the market for a particular commodity, but for that particular commodity, supply decreases from time to time. It will not meet the demand which exists in the market. When there is a shortage of the supply of the commodity, there will be a pressure on the product's price to become very high. The price will become skyrocketed. This is the impact or the effect that we're going to have when there is a decrease in the supply. Less supply, constant demand in the market will result higher equilibrium price and low equilibrium quantity. So, in brief, we conclude that with the same demand curve, the effect of increasing supply result lower equilibrium price and larger equilibrium quantity. The effect of decreasing the supply will result higher equilibrium price and smaller equilibrium quantity. These are the two effects that we have in relation to increase or decrease in the supply curve when demand remain constant. Okay, students, that's all for today. To briefly highlight what we have discussed in today's session, we dealt with the effects of change in demand when supply remain constant and effects of change in supply when demand remain constant, their impact or effects on equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And there are 4 different cases in 2 different conditions. When there is increase in demand, assuming that supply remain constant, equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price will rise. Whenever there is higher demand in the market, it's obvious suppliers will encourage to supply, but there is also an increase in the price of that particular commodity. The other situation is when there is a decrease in demand, it will result decrease in equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. When the lower the demand in the market, it's obvious producers will be forced to sell their product with low price. This is the impact that you have when there is decrease in demand in the market. The other one, when there is a change in supply, when demand remain constant. When there is no change in demand, if supply increase or decrease, what will be its effect on equilibrium price? Decrease in supply will result equilibrium quantity to become lower and increase in equilibrium price. The lower the supply of the commodity will result the higher the equilibrium price, but the quantity will become obviously decrease. Increase in supply, it's obvious it will create excess supply, and that will result equilibrium price to become very low or decreases. This is what we have seen in today's session in brief. Students, you need to read your textbook for further information and to develop the knowledge that you have in this short lesson video. As usual, do this exercise on your exercise book. That's all for today. Until we meet in the next lesson video, goodbye.